and data processors under the General Data Protection Regulations (GDPR). We will delve into their responsibilities, obligations, and the relationship between them. Data controllers first. Determining data processing purposes. Data controllers decide why and how personal data is processed. They set the objectives for data processing activities and choose the methods to achieve these objectives. Second, compliance with data protection principles. Data controllers must ensure that personal data is processed lawfully, fairly, and transparently. They must adhere to principles such as data minimization, accuracy, storage, limitation, integrity, and confidentiality. Third, establishing legal basis for processing. Data controllers must identify and document the legal basis for processing personal data, which could include consent, performance of contract, compliance with legal obligations, protection of vital interest, public interest, or legitimate interest. Fourth, ensuring data subject rights. Data controllers are responsible for facilitating and upholding the rights of data subjects, including the right to access, rectification, erasure, restriction of processing data, portability, and objection. Data processors processing data on behalf of the controller. The primary role of a data processor is to process personal data in accordance with the instructions provided by the data controller. The processor must not process the data for its own purposes. Implementing appropriate security measures. Data processors are required to implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure a level of security appropriate to the risk, protecting personal data against accidental or unlawful destruction, loss, alteration, unauthorized disclosure, or access. Assisting the controller with the data subject request. Data processor must assist the data controller in fulfilling data subject requests related to their rights under GDPR, such as access, rectification, erasure, restriction of processing data, portability, and objection. The relationship between the data controllers and data processors. First, determination of roles. Data controllers determine the purposes and means of processing personal data. Data processors process personal data on behalf of the data controller following the controller's instructions. Second, data processing agreement (DPA), a legally binding contract that must be in place between the data controller and the data processor. The DPA outlines the scope, nature, purpose, and duration of processing, as well as the types of personal data and categories of data subjects involved. Third, responsibilities and obligations. Data controllers ensure that the data processor implements appropriate technical and organizational measures to protect personal data. Data processor process data only on documented instructions from the data controllers. Fourth, sub-processing. Data processors can engage sub-processors only with the prior written consent of the data controller. The processor must ensure that sub-processors are bound by the same data protection obligations as outlined in the DPA. Fifth, accountability and documentation. Both data controllers and data processors must maintain records of processing activities. The data controller must demonstrate compliance with the GDPR by documenting the decision-making process and ensuring the processor's compliance. Accountability. Data controllers bear the primary responsibility for ensuring and demonstrating compliance with GDPR. Their accountability obligations include ensuring compliance with the core principle of data protection, maintaining detailed records of all data processing activities, conducting dpias for processing activities that are likely to result in a high risk to the rights and freedoms of individuals, ensuring that all processing activities have a valid legal basis under the GDPR, facilitating and upholding the rights of data subjects, implementing appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure data protection principles are integrated into processing activities from the outset and by default, notifying the relevant supervisory authority of a personal data breach without undue delay. And if the breach is likely to result in a high risk to individuals, informing affected data subjects and appointing a DPO if required. Data processors. Data processors also have a specific accountability obligations under GDPR. Even though they act on behalf of data controllers, their responsibilities include processing personal data only on documented instructions from the data controllers, implementing appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure a level of security appropriate to the risk, assisting data controllers in fulfilling their obligations under GDPR, informing the data controller without undue delay after becoming aware of a personal data breach, engaging sub-processors only with the prior written consents of the data controller and ensuring that sub-processors are bound by the same data protection obligations, maintaining records of all categories of processing activities carried out on behalf of each data controller and cooperating with supervisory authorities in the performance of their tasks. Liability first, data controllers are primarily responsible for ensuring that personal data is processed in compliance with GDPR. They can be held liable for non-compliance with the GDPR principles, violation of data subject rights, data breaches, and a lack of proper contracts. Second, data processors. Data processors are also held accountable under GDPR. Processors can be held liable for processing without instructions, failure to implement security measures, sub-processors liability, and failure to assist the controller. Third, joint and several liability. Under GDPR, both the data controllers and data processors can be jointly and severally liable for any damages caused by non-compliance. This means that the data subject can seek compensation from either party. Fines, higher, lower, a fine amount, 10 million euro or 2% of turnover, applicable in fragments. Failing to implement appropriate technical and organizational measures, not conducting DPIs when required, not appointing a DPO if mandated, failing to keep records of processing activities. Fines, higher, fine amount, 20 million euro or 4% of a turnover, applicable in fragments, violating the basic principles of processing, infringing data subjects' rights, unauthorized international transfers of personal data, failing to comply with an order by a supervisory authority. Conclusion: both data controllers and data processors have significant responsibilities and can be held liable for any damages resulting from non-compliance with the GDPR. Their liability can be joint and several, meaning both parties can be pursued for all the full amount of compensation. Ensuring compliance with the GDPR is crucial for both controllers and processors to mitigate the risk of liability and protect the rights of data subjects. Thank you.